If you're looking to get the most out of Tim Urban's What's Our Problem? Without getting bogged down in the details, you've found your ideal reading companion. In this video, we're tackling chapters 3 and 4, where Urban delves into the messy, often shocking history of the Republican Party. We've carefully crafted our summary to preserve the spirit of Urban's writing while making sure you don't miss any of the key events and ideas. So, whether you're short on time or simply looking for a more engaging way to absorb this fascinating book, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Chapter 3: The Downward Spiral. We find ourselves in the United States, a diverse nation with a rich and tumultuous history of group conflicts: Loyalist vs. Revolutionary, Federalist vs. Anti-Federalist, North vs. South, Homegrown vs. Immigrant. The country has seen periods of intense political strife, like the years following George Washington's presidency, the lead up to the Civil War, and the turn of the 20th century. But it has also known times of relative calm, such as the post-World War Women II era, when the existential threat of global communism and the shared sacrifice of the war effort fostered a sense of national unity. The 1950s exemplify this political unity. The two main parties, Democrats and Republicans, are so ideologically mixed that voters often struggle to tell them apart. When national hero Dwight Eisenhower considers running for president, it's not even clear which party he'll choose. But this is not an era without division, it's merely dispersed, with some citizens focused on local issues, others on state or national politics, and still others fired up by the Cold War raging internationally. Beneath this tranquil surface, however, tensions simmer. A fringe movement, the Republican fundamentalists, is slowly gaining steam. Descended from the McCarthyites of the previous decade, they're pulled ever rightward by a rigid ideology that brooks no compromise, viewing politics as a zero-sum struggle between good and evil. As the 60s unfold in a whirlwind of societal change, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, the rise of the new left the political tribes that once dispersed their ire across local, state, and national levels begin to coalesce around a single national divide between left and right. Simultaneously, another shift is underway. Americans are becoming more educated and more mobile, increasingly choosing to live among the like-minded. It starts imperceptibly a slight preference for familiarity, magnified by opportunities for migration. But bit by bit, neighborhoods transform. A 20% bias toward living near similar folks becomes near total segregation as conservatives flock together and progressives cluster elsewhere. Intermarriage across party lines grows ever rarer. In these isolated silos, different lived realities take shape, each group increasingly unable to understand the other's perspective. The media, once a force for integration, begins to splinter in order to cater to these divergent realities. Narrowcast outlets arise on cable TV and talk radio, each a mirror held up to their audience's pre-existing beliefs and grievances. Internet algorithms amplify the divide, serving up content carefully tailored to maximize engagement, and study after study shows that outrage reliably grabs eyeballs. Extreme voices, once confined to the lonely fringes, are handed a megaphone to spread their views far and wide. In the miasma of online forums and comment sections, conspiracy theories flourish unchecked, untethered from any factual anchor. Gradually, imperceptibly, the perceptions of left and right spiral ever further from each other and from any shared reality. On issue after issue, even the basic facts are in dispute. Is crime rising or falling? Are racial minorities being helped too little by government programs or unfairly advantaged? Social media feeds seethe with dehumanizing invective directed at the other side. They're not just wrong, they're stupid, brainwashed, even evil. Studies show political animus mounting to exceed even racial prejudice in some cases. Each group retreats further into its own echo chamber, growing ever more convinced of its righteousness and the other side's malevolence. In the realm of politics, the ground shifts beneath everyone's feet. The center cannot hold as hyperpartisans on the wings gain sway, pulling their parties toward the extremes. Moderate voices are drowned out or pushed aside, derided as sellouts or collaborators with the enemy. Voters, angered by the relentless demonization of their side, hunger for champions who will take the fight to the opposition, norms be damned. Civility, toleration, forbearance, the soft guardrails that long kept the system stable are trampled in the rush for partisan advantage. No one wants to disarm unilaterally, so the arms race ratchets ever upward. Neutral institutions of government become weapons to wield rather than tools for governance. Once routine procedures, like raising the debt ceiling or approving nominees, are weaponized in an all-out struggle for power. To the public, it looks increasingly like a rigged game, a corrupt system incapable of getting anything done. A crisis of trust brews as citizens lose faith that their government serves the collective good rather than narrow factional interests. Why even participate in such a broken system? A polity polarized into two distrustful, antagonistic tribes, each refracted through its own separate reality, proves fertile ground for demagogues peddling simplistic solutions and neatly packaged scapegoats. Only a strong leader can cut through the gridlock and save us from them. Comes the cry, and piece by piece, the stage is set for a slide into authoritarianism. Norms that seemed inviolable, like respecting the peaceful transfer of power, start to wobble. Partisans increasingly view the stakes of losing as existential, rationalizing away the guardrails as mere obstacles to achieving their righteous ends. America thus finds itself slipping downward in a vicious spiral, the centripetal forces of liberal democracy slowly overcome by the centrifugal pull of hypercharged tribalism. Those who sounded early warnings were dismissed as alarmists. It can't happen here, right? But their ranks grow with each passing year as the dysfunction mounts and the rhetoric heats up. Only the most naively optimistic still believe that some natural pendulum will inevitably swing back to a stable equilibrium. The rest survey the scene with foreboding, wondering nervously just how far the unraveling might go if left unchecked. Some compare it to a merry-go-round, spinning ever faster, its riders too enthralled by the dizzying motion to notice the bolts shaking loose. Others see tectonic plates pulling apart, the pressure building silently until one day the earthquake comes. However one envisions it, a sense of deep unease has settled across the land, a suspicion that we're living on borrowed time. Conversations once off limits now take place in hushed tones. Could we be headed for another civil war? The question hangs heavy. How long until it all comes crashing down? History offers sobering parallels for those willing to heed them. From ancient Athens to the Roman Republic, from Weimar Germany to the former Yugoslavia, the story is disturbingly similar. A stable society, under mounting stress, slowly pulls apart at the seams. Demagogues arise, exploiting the cracks. Institutions strain and then shatter under the pressure. By the time the people awaken to the danger, it's too late to stop the unraveling. But history also offers hope for those determined to find it. In our own Civil War, the Union ultimately held. During the Great Depression, Americans pulled together and persevered. In the Civil Rights era, a nation stirred its conscience and bent the arc toward justice. Time and again, when the chips were down, Americans found within themselves the wisdom and fortitude to renew their founding promise, however imperfectly. The question now is whether that reservoir of resilience remains sufficient for the challenges at hand, or whether this time is different. The stakes could hardly be higher. The fate of the American experiment hangs in the balance. Chapter 4: Rise of the Red Golem. The 1960s are a time of upheaval in America, and the Republican Party is no exception. Beneath the surface of this grand old party, a fierce battle for its soul is underway. 4 factions, each with its own vision for the future, vie for control. There are the Rockefeller Republicans in the Northeast, the Midwestern Conservatives, the Western Libertarians, and the Southern Conservatives. It's a broad coalition, held together more by a shared opposition to the Democrats than any unified ideology. But there's a fifth force emerging, one that will soon throw this delicate balance into disarray: the Republican fundamentalists, or RFS for short. They're a different breed, altogether militant, uncompromising, and utterly convinced of their own righteousness. In their black and white worldview, there's no room for nuance or negotiation. You're either with them or against them, a true believer or a traitor to the cause. The RFS have a plan, and it starts at the grassroots. They set their sights on the Young Republicans, the party's influential youth wing. At the 1963 Young Republican National Convention, RF operatives go to work behind the scenes, manipulating parliamentary procedures to seize control. It's a master class in hardball politics. The moderates hardly know what hit them. In the end, the RFS walk away with the chairmanship and a platform that reads like a fundamentalist fantasy: abolishing the federal income tax, withdrawing from the UN, and doubling down on segregation. Emboldened by their success, the RFS turned to California. They're playing the long game now, backing hardline conservatives in every race from dogcatcher on up. Moderate incumbents are caught flat-footed, unsure how to handle these new tactics. They appeal to party unity, to tradition and decorum. The RFS just go for the jugular. When the dust settles, the California GOP is firmly in fundamentalist hands. But the real prize is the 1964 presidential nomination, and the RFS have their man, Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater. Goldwater is the ultimate true believer, a man who once famously declared that extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. When he takes the stage at the Republican National Convention to accept the nomination, it's a fundamentalist coming out party. The crowd goes wild as he denounces the growing menace in Washington and the moral decay afflicting the nation. It's us against them, good versus evil, and Goldwater promises to take the fight to the enemy. But here's the thing about the RFS. For all their talk of conservatism, they're not really about ideology at all. It's about power, getting it, keeping it, using it to crush their opponents. The ends justify the means, always. So what if Goldwater has to play footsie with the John Birch Society and its conspiracy theories? Who cares if his delegates boo and catcall moderate speakers off the stage? This is war, and the RFS are playing to win. In the end, of course, they lose. Goldwater gets clobbered by Lyndon Johnson in one of the biggest landslides in American history. But the RFS have left their mark. They've shown that with enough discipline and ruthlessness, a committed minority can capture a major party and bend it to their will. The high-rung conservatives, with their antiquated notions of civility and fair play, are left grasping at air. Flash forward to the 1980s. The RFS are in retreat, beaten back by years of electoral drubbings. But then along comes Ronald Reagan, the great communicator. Reagan looks like a fundamentalist dream, a true blue conservative, a man who talks tough and carries a big stick. But he's also got something else: charisma, and loads of it. When Reagan speaks, people listen. He spins grand visions of a shining city on a hill, a beacon of freedom in a world gone mad. He makes conservatism sound not just reasonable, but noble, even romantic. Under Reagan's big tent, the squabbling factions of the GOP find common cause. The moderates appreciate his pragmatism, his willingness to cut deals and find common ground. The hardliners love his tough talk on the Soviets and his promise to slash taxes and regulations. Even the RFS are mollified after all. Reagan is one of their own, a Goldwaterite from way back. But there's trouble brewing beneath the surface. For all his conservative bona fides, Reagan is no ideologue. He's a politician first and foremost, willing to bend when circumstances demand it. He raises taxes when the deficit balloons, grants amnesty to millions of undocumented immigrants, even sits down with the dreaded Soviets to hash out arms control. To the purists in the RF camp, it's a betrayal of everything they stand for. As the Reagan era wanes, the hardliners reassert themselves. They find new champions in firebrands like Newt Gingrich and Tom DeLay. men who see politics as a blood sport. Gingrich, the ringleader, hones a slash and burn style that makes Reagan's tough talk sound like a bedtime story. He teaches a whole generation of Republicans that the way to win is not through ideas or persuasion, but by demonizing the opposition and never giving an inch. Meanwhile, a new breed of right-wing media is on the rise. Talk radio stars like Rush Limbaugh and cable firebrands like Bill O'Reilly perfect the art of the perpetual outrage machine. They tell their listeners that liberals are not just misguided, but actively evil a fifth column working to destroy the American way of life. Any compromise is tantamount to surrender. It's a worldview tailor-made for the RFS, and they embrace it with gusto. As the new millennium dawns, the Republican Party is a changed animal. The old guard, with their quaint notions of bipartisanship and civil discourse, have been shoved aside. In their place is a new generation of hardliners, steeped in the Gingrich playbook and the Limbaugh liturgy. They see politics as an all-or-nothing proposition, a zero-sum game where the only way to win is to pummel the other side into submission. When Barack Obama is elected in 2008, the hardliners see their chance. They paint the new president as a radical socialist, a Manchurian candidate bent on destroying America from within. They vow to block his every move, to make him a one-term president at any cost. The Tea Party movement emerges, a grassroots uprising fueled by fury and Facebook. Suddenly, even the most hardline Republicans are looking over their shoulders, afraid of being primaried by someone even more extreme. But the real turning point comes in 2016, with the rise of Donald Trump. Trump is the Frankenstein's monster of the RF movement, a creature stitched together from bits and pieces of Goldwater, Gingrich, and Limbaugh. He's got the fundamentalist zeal, the take-no-prisoners attitude, the utter disdain for the norms and niceties of traditional politics. But he's also got something else, a gut-level understanding of the power of spectacle, of how to capture the public's attention and never let it go. Trump barrels through the Republican primaries like a freight train, leaving a pack of shell-shocked establishment candidates in his wake. He breaks every rule in the political playbook, insulting war heroes, mocking the disabled, bragging about sexual assault, and his support only grows. To the RFS, he's a revelation, a walking, talking middle finger to the powers that be. When Trump defies the odds and wins the presidency, it's the final triumph of the fundamentalists. They've spent decades working to remake the Republican Party in their own image, and now they have their man in the White House. But it quickly becomes clear that Trump is no ordinary president. He governs by tweet and tantrum, lashing out at anyone who dares to cross him. He cozies up to dictators and alienates allies, turns the Oval Office into a reality TV set. As the 2020 election approaches, Trump makes it clear that he has no intention of going quietly. He rails against mail-in ballots, sows doubt about the integrity of the vote, even suggests that he might not accept the results if he loses. When the votes are counted and Joe Biden is declared the winner, Trump refuses to concede. He insists that the election was rigged, that he was robbed of a second term by a vast conspiracy of Democrats, deep state operatives, and foreign powers. In the weeks that follow, Trump and his allies file a barrage of lawsuits challenging the results in swing states. They pressure state officials to overturn the will of the voters, even urge Republican-controlled legislatures to appoint their own slates of electors. When all else fails, they summon a mob to the Capitol on January 6th, whipping them into a frenzy with baseless claims of fraud and exhortations to fight like hell. The result is a deadly insurrection, a shocking assault on the very heart of American democracy. In the aftermath of January 6th, a few brave Republicans stand up and speak out. They denounce Trump and his enablers, call for a return to sanity and the rule of law. But they are drowned out by a chorus of equivocation and excuse-making. The party's leaders, terrified of Trump's hold on the base, tie themselves in knots to avoid offending him. They oust Liz Cheney from her leadership post for the crime of telling the truth, elevate the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz to the status of folk heroes. As the dust settles, it becomes clear that the Republican Party has been irrevocably transformed. The old guard, the keepers of the Reagan flame, have been routed. In their place is a new breed of Republican, one that sees Trump not as an aberration, but as a template. They are the heirs of Goldwater and Gingrich, of Limbaugh and Hannity, and they are ascendant. The rise of the Red Golem is a cautionary tale, a story of what happens when a political party abandons its principles in pursuit of power. It's a reminder that the guardrails of democracy are only as strong as the people who uphold them, and that even the mightiest of institutions can crumble if they are hollowed out from within. But it's also a story that is still being written. The Republican Party stands at a crossroads, caught between its better angels and its darkest impulses. Will it find its way back to the high ground of Lincoln and Roosevelt, of Eisenhower and Reagan? Or will it continue its descent into the abyss of authoritarianism and demagoguery? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The fate of the American experiment hangs in the balance. For if the party of Lincoln becomes the party of Trump, if the defenders of liberty become the agents of its undoing, then the shining city on the hill will be lost forever. And that is a fate too terrible to contemplate. And there you have it, a concise yet comprehensive look at chapters 3 and 4 of Tim Urban's What's Our Problem? We've covered a lot of ground today, but we hope our summary has left you feeling more informed and more engaged with these critical topics. If you want to support our work and help us continue to grow, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing our videos with your friends and family.